Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I am David, a bookseller at Literati Bookstore. We are pleased to welcome Susanne Wedlich to our At Home with Literati series in support of slime. She will be joined in conversation by Jessica Leigh Hester. And just a quick webinar overview for all of our attendees. The chat is closed, but you can keep your chat window open as I will be dropping links to purchase slime from Literati throughout the event. The Q&A is accessible, and please submit questions. Live transcription is available on your toolbar as well. And if you're watching us later on YouTube, links to purchase the book are in the description. And a reminder, you can also shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeastern Michigan, our doors are open to the public for in-store shopping. Most of all, we'd like to thank you for your attendance this afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are. Thank you for being here. And now, allow me to introduce tonight's author and our moderator. Susanne Wedlich studied biology and political science in Munich and worked as a writer in Boston and Singapore. She is currently a freelance science journalist for Der Spiegel, National Geographic, and Spektrum der Wissenschaft. She lives in Munich. Jessica Leigh Hester is a science journalist. She has worked as a senior editor and staff writer at Atlas Obscura and an editor at City Lab, where she covered the environment and urban infrastructure. Her work has also appeared in The Atlantic, New Yorker, New York Times, and elsewhere. She lives in New York City and Baltimore, where she's also a PhD student at Johns Hopkins University and always trawling for stories about ecology and trash. And with that, I leave you. I will be back shortly.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful introduction. Very welcoming. Very happy to be here. Looking forward to jumping into some of your questions eventually, but we're going to spend the first part of this in conversation, just the two of us kind of getting into some of the big picture and nitty-gritty slimy details of this beautiful book. So I thought to that end, it might be helpful to start with a very broad question that you start to tackle in the introduction and early chapters, which is the large umbrella of stuff that can be considered slime. So viewers tuning in might immediately think of, the trails left by, creatures like these on the cover, or, you may have seen news stories about sea snot, but you very helpfully point out early on that there is probably no single living creature that does not depend on slime in some way. That totally blew my mind. I had not thought about slime being everywhere or something that many of us probably take for granted. So just to kind of orient us, what can be considered slime? What are all the things we should think of?
Okay, first of all, thanks so much for inviting me, and thank you, Jessica, for doing this here with me. What is slime? Okay, that's a great question, and it's a rather complicated question because slime is everything and anything that feels slimy. So I, for the book, I interviewed someone who worked on microbial slimes, and I asked him for his definition, and he said slime is basically stiff water, and it's more like it's not a material per se, it's more like a property that materials can have. That means there are just so many different slimes, but it's easier for me probably to say what I'm not interested in. So I'm not talking about play slimes. This is not about fun and kids and somehow baking or cooking your own slime. And
it also does sound fun though.
yeah, it does. But I mean, it's fun, but it's a bit boring, Mm-hmm. I'm also not interested in slime that's just a product of decay. So we all know that, of course, you have a piece of fruit in the kitchen and you forget about it, and then it just starts rotting and then it gets slimy. That's, again, not a rather fascinating slime. It's just more and more disorder. So what I'm interested in, that's biological slime, all kinds of biological slimes, like you say, snail trails or microbial slimes that can produce if it's warm and too nutritious in water, the sea snot, stuff like that. And of course, our own mucus. And it's true, I think, that every single living being, being a microbe, a plant, animal, humans, we all need and we all produce slimes. Or, of course, if anyone knows of a slimeless creature, please let me know. That would be really fascinating. I haven't found one. And it's probably been like that from the beginning of life on Earth.
That's amazing. You sort of started to walk toward the next question, which is, what, if anything, do all slimes that you're interested in at least have in common at the biological level? Is it that they all in some way behave like wet water, or is there something more to it than that?
Yeah, there's much more to it. And that was the first big surprise for me. So it took me forever just to find all those different slimes, because they have different names depending on who produces the slime. So if it's a microbe, it's called a biofilm. For plants, it's mucilage. We have our mucus, all those different substances. And it took me forever just to make sure that they're really all biological slimes, and then surprise, surprise, that they're really similar just on a molecular level. The stiff water means that all those slimes are at least 95% water. That's just kept in like a scaffold or a network of molecules. And the surprising thing is that if you can treat and mistreat water as much as you want, it will never change its behavior, right? You can stir it, you can pour it, it's always just water. And it's different when it comes to biological slimes. So if there's just a certain type of mechanical pressure, and it will change its behavior. Many slimes can do that. It will become more liquid or more solid, and then simply change back once the pressure is gone. And that's what makes it so versatile. That's why we all have slimes and use them in those many, many ways, for lubrication, as a glue, and of course, all those fantastic barriers we have in the body.
That's fascinating. I have a quick follow-up about that. So you pointed out that there are all these different words, and you listed many of them now, and there are many very colorful descriptions of them in the book. And I wonder, like, how did that affect your research process? Like, as a science reporter, if you're going to something like Google Scholar or trying to wrap your brain around the body of literature, but there are all these different words used to refer to things that you want to track down, like, how did you draw borders around like what you needed to look at when, and how did you even keep all the terms straight?
Yeah, it took me forever. Yeah, in the beginning, the first problem was, of course, that I didn't know that slime is such a big story, because if you only Google slime or maybe mucus, then you only get a tiny fraction of what's out there. And once I realized that there are all these different names, I often went for, words like lubricating, or scientists often don't write, okay, this animal produces a slime, it's a sticky secretion, and okay, yeah, let's look at that. And basically every day I checked for news, scientific news, going from biofilm and mucus and slime and goo and ooze and sticky and lubricating, and that was half the day basically, just to get all the pieces together. And once I knew, of course, that probably all creatures use slime, then I could be more specific to say which part of life have I left out. That there has to be some slime. It was very often there's somewhere there's a slime in there, and then of course I would find it. But it took forever. I mean, the research for the book took me 3 years. So basically, I have a PhD in slime.
You should make a decorative diploma for your office. I mean, I'm just picturing your inbox with like all the Google alerts for different synonyms for slime. Basically, that sounds amazing. But I think very importantly, the book does not only cover science. There's a lot in here about sort of the cultural meanings of slime, and the way that different artists have made use of slime or made reference to slime in poems and movies, Ghostbusters, everything from Ghostbusters to SpongeBob SquarePants, an important cultural artifact as well. So I would love to hear a little bit about why you decided to braid together this cultural fascination with slime with the rich scientific basis of it.
Yeah, I mean, slime, as you said, has such a rich cultural history. And again, once you start looking, you will find so much stuff. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we're so emotional when it comes to slime. And then of course you always have a cultural impact and artists will use it. But there's just, it's just a beautiful timeline also to see how our emotions towards slime have changed. So if you go back maybe 100 years, 150 years, then very often that ambiguous nature of slime, is it solid, is it fluid, is it alive, or is it fully dead? You know, is it just oozing, or oh my God, is it a living thing? I think that people, artists and scientists saw that as a potential. You have this more or less that matter that can become life. And then if you look at the early evolutionary biologists like Ernst Haeckel, contemporary of Darwin, who did those beautiful jellyfish drawings and stuff like that, he even thought that all life came from slime. So of course, with God, so to speak, out of the picture, you had to explain where life came from. And he said there's a slime, like primeval slime, covering the seafloor, pulsating all the time and just bringing forth life. So he saw that as fully, just as potential. And that, of course, changed. Now for us, that strange nature of slime, it's just threatening, and it's maybe something's rotting, or of course in pop culture now it's only monsters and aliens. If there's a slime, you always know, okay, that's the villain. It can never be the good guy. Yeah. And that has really changed. If you think it's Alien, Ghostbusters, The Fly, all those things, it's so slimy. But if you go back maybe to fairy tales, all those witches, they're super dry. I mean, nowadays they would all be drooling, probably, and the dragons would be slimy. But back then they were all dry because probably slime didn't have that growth out potential yet. So yeah, in the beginning, I actually thought I would do it, you know, one half just the cultural stuff and then the science. And once I realized that just the biological slime, it's just such a huge story that, to my knowledge, has never been told, and goes from cancer to climate change, really. I thought, okay, this has to be the center of the book and the cultural part, which of course isn't my expertise. It's just, you know, like a byproduct, but I have to put it in there somewhere.
Yes. You touched on this a little in your response to that question. But, you know, I think we can't talk about slime without acknowledging that for many people, it is gross, hopefully compelling and fascinating, but certainly gross as well. You write in the book, in phrasing that I loved, in our modern day response to viscous secretions of all kinds, disgust and a mostly reflexive defense mechanism still reigns supreme. I can just kind of picture people like gagging or dry heaving a little bit if they picture, you know, some of those scenes from Ghostbusters of like a dripping, slimy creature. What do you think it would take to rebrand slime as something to which people don't react in such a like theatrically over the top way?
It's easy. Everyone should read my book. And then
Fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, the amazing thing was that, of course, in the beginning, I wasn't crazy about slime. It was just a story I happened upon, and I realized it's just huge. Everything's in there, human body, evolution, everything. And then I became fascinated, and I couldn't stop. So I thought, maybe a bit naively, that to all readers out there, it would be the same. But of course, then while doing the research, when I told friends that I was writing a book on slime, many of them were like, oh no, just the word was too much for them. And then I have relatives who haven't read the book yet because they can't bring themselves to crack it open. It's just so gross for them. And another novelty, according to my publishers, it's never happened before. Quite a few booksellers in Germany refused to stock the book. Because they said the topic is too gross. Not the book, the topic is too gross. They don't want to have it in the shop. Which is kind of amazing.
That's their loss.
Yeah, but it's just the thing, you know, they have maybe 50 Shades of Grey, all those bloody murder mysteries, whatever, no problem at all. But then you have a nonfiction book. It's a bit of a crazy response. And so I think that we can only overcome that disgust by really engaging with what the material really is. It was the same for me, just hearing about what slimes can do, how important it is, that there would be no life, or at least not the kind of life we know without slime, or that we would literally fall apart without slime and be overrun by pathogens and parasites at the same time. I think you can't not be fascinated by that. But
the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah. But of course, you have to take the first step and take a deep breath and open the book or read about it somewhere else. I mean, it's not the only source.
Right. Well, I think, because you just alluded to this, maybe you could tell us a little about the origin story for you, like how you came upon your understanding that this is a bigger topic than you might have thought. I'd love to know sort of what your assumptions were going in, and what persuaded you to start looking deeper.
Yeah, it was, I think, by now almost 20 years ago, an article in the New Scientist magazine on snail trails. And that, which I didn't know back then, these are really contact ads. So snails leave messages in their trails so that the guy can find the girl, because they can read from the slime which species it is she female, is she pretty, even attractive, which way did she go. Yeah, I mean, even that, and then they follow each other. And there are other carnivorous snails. They have they're called rosy wolf snails. They have the lip like a mustache, so really a broad thing, but that's a slime scanner. So they scan foreign trails, and they can read from this, is it a potential mating partner, or is it a prey snail? Stuff like that. And it was just one of those moments, you read something and you think there's more to the story. And it's just not possible that everyone has boring slime, but only snails have that amazing complex thing. And then, as you do, I ripped the article out, kept it in a drawer for many years. And then at one point I thought, okay, I will just try to research and find if there's actually more. And then, of course, 3 years later.
There was.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. One thing that I think is very immediately obvious to anyone who picks up the book is that the writing is really beautiful, and it's definitely not, a gross out book, even if the topic is sometimes one to which someone may have a visceral reaction. And I was wondering how you avoided toppling completely into gross out terrain, like how you managed to tiptoe that tightrope. Did you have a process for like reining yourself in, or, spitballing ideas off of someone who helped like gatekeep the grossness or something like that? Or how did you manage?
Not at all. I actually wanted to gross out people. I thought it would be fun. But then once you get down to it and you write about slime and it's so sophisticated, it's so incredibly complex, then it's hard. I mean, the disgust comes only from if you see it as an amorphous material. But once even how snails move on slime, right? I mean, if you think about it, it's really a crazy thing. They have just one foot, and that's a really sticky material. It's like chewing gum. So how do they move? And if you watch a snail from underneath crawling maybe on a glass plate, you see that there are waves, like dark bands traveling along the sole all the time. And these are muscle contractions that push down on the slime till that inner scaffold breaks, which means the slime on that particular spot is more liquid. So the snail can glide over it. Once that wave, that muscle contraction has passed, it will harden out again. So the snail can push off from here. This is so amazingly complex for such a simple thing. We have all seen snails crawling around, and you would never think that this is higher physics in a sense.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. And once you write about that, and I mean, there was so many examples how organisms fine-tune their slimes. I mean, like our body does. If you think about it, we have all those mucus barriers in the body. For example, in the female genital tract, which has a problem because it's like an opening for pathogens. You don't want any germs inside the body, but then it has to be open to sperm. eventually. How do you do that? Okay, you build a really, really thick slimy barrier that keeps everyone out, but it thins out only during the fertile days of the cycle, of the monthly cycle. So then sperm can get through. But it's just open maybe for 2 or 3 days, and then will be closed again. And even then, when it's open, if there are sperm that are somehow defective, not really fit swimmers, they will still be filtered out. And that's amazing for stiff water. I mean, we're still talking about maybe 97% of water that's just being held in the network. And once you get down to that and try to explain it, it's just so fantastic that you almost forget why you found it disgusting in the first place. I mean, it's different, of course. If I found like some foreign slime and didn't know where it came from, that's still hard to take, of course. And I mean, and you're not supposed to have someone sneeze on you. That is disgusting, and you should shy away from it. And disgust is supposed to keep us from infection, so that's a good thing. But just engaging with the material itself, that's just so amazing. I mean, there's new research out from MIT, a group, that those molecules that make the slime scaffold can defeat dangerous germs, even the cholera bacteria and those kinds of germs, by not killing them and not removing them, just keeping them in a sense asleep, so they can't gang up together and make their own slime biofilms and produce their toxins. They just keep them separate, and they're somehow alive but not doing anything. So many functions, just water, I repeat myself, and a few molecules, and that's amazing.
Yeah, that's incredible. Another thing that you touch on a lot in the book is the ubiquity of slime in different environments. How, we find it in the ocean, in addition to our bodies, basically, all over the place. And I was wondering if there's a particular landscape or geographic feature that slime appears, or where slime appears, that you think might be surprising to readers.
I have two. One, I'm sorry to say, is the ocean. And even though we can't see it, it's covered in a skin of slime, a really thin slime, but it's there, and it's incredibly important because this is the interface between the ocean and the atmosphere. And I mentioned before that slime is also a climate story, because this barrier is one where every single exchange between the air and the water it moderates it. And that slime is microbial, mostly microbial. And we know that, of course, many microbes just love it if there are higher temperatures. So the water warms up, it's entirely possible that they will produce more slime, which means that barrier that covers basically 2/3 of the planet will become thicker. And that will probably, no one really knows, influence all those exchanges like oxygen that's being produced by phytoplankton in the ocean and has to get out so that we can breathe it in, or all those extra CO2 that the ocean thankfully takes up will be slower, that exchange, or maybe even speed up. Everything's possible. No one really knows, because it's incredibly hard to research that thin layer that you can't even see. But it's important, and people should look at this. And another one that surprised me, was that there's also slime in the desert. That's really important.
Oh, wow.
I mean, they have this watery material that dries out so quickly, but again, in the desert, there are communities of organisms like bacteria, algae, maybe moss, a few invertebrates that come together. They're called biological soil crusts. And the first one to settle there is cyanobacteria. And they produce a slime, a biofilm, just that sticky glue that will anchor eventually the whole community there, but it also glues together the particles of the soil there, or the sand particles, which means if we lose those soil crusts, of course, erosion will hit particularly hard that spot. And they're really vulnerable. They cover a lot of ground. Again, you hardly see them. I mean, of course, you will see a moss if you look closely at snails, stuff like that. But often it looks just like a burned surface. And maybe you've seen it. I've seen it the first time many years ago in the States, in some nature park. I don't remember where it was just this trail in this not really a desert or very arid area, and said, please don't leave the trail, because you will just destroy some life forms. It was what's alive here. It looks it's black, basically. It's just a surface, but it's alive, and we need it, and it's so vulnerable, and it takes forever to grow back. If it's in, you need just to step on it, and of course then it's destroyed. So there are all these slimes that we can't see, often at interfaces, between the soil and the air, or water and the air, or even in our body. Everywhere the environment touches our inner surfaces, you will have a slime. So we can't see it, but it's there, and it's really incredibly important.
And sometimes it sounds like we are risks to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I loved the example you gave a few minutes ago about, watching a snail propel itself in this really complicated way. And in the book, you talk a lot about different ways that animals use slimes, and how some creatures make use of it in many different ways. Like you talk a lot about how limpets use slime in several different kinds of manners. And I was wondering if there's any particular animal that uses slime in a way that you found like particularly mesmerizing or surprising, or fun.
Yeah, many actually. Like, just think about frogs and their tongues. I mean, what's cooler than catching your prey by just sitting there, propelling your tongue out?
Very powerful.
And then the saliva really does the trick. Of course, it's a slime again. And again, that higher physics, that when it hits the prey animal, it thins out because the scaffold breaks down, and then the saliva will just coat the whole prey. It would be it a fly or anything really. And then once the tongue pulls back, then the pressure is gone, and then it hardens. It becomes really sticky. So the prey will basically bungee jump into the frog's mouth and can't do anything about it, because it's such a great glue. And maybe, so if you have seen frogs eating, and it looks as if they were really enjoying their meals, because they close their eyes, and it's like, oh, this is terrific. But what they're actually doing is that, of course, they have to get that stuck prey animal off the tongue. How do you do that? They pull their eyeballs in a bit and scrape them off so that they can swallow them. So that's pretty cool. Wow. One example. But then you mentioned the limpets. I have to say, I really love snails. I think it's just the fact that we know so much about their slimes, because whenever anyone wanted to research slime, where do you go? Of course, first you pick up a snail, and we know then again about the personal ads that they leave, but then there are others like the limpets you mentioned, who use their own trails like an external memory to find their way back home. Because if you're in a tidal zone and you have to hurry back before the tide goes out, and then you're in danger of drying out, you have to find your way back. So they will use their own slime to go there. And there's even one species, but probably there are more, I think. It's so hard to imagine that only one species came up with this. That's the great owl snail, I think, in California, who will even let algae grow on their own slime, because there's so much slime accumulated around the spot where they live. And researchers think that slime is even like a fertilizer to the algae. And wow. Then it will grow there. It's like a little garden, and they can graze there very sustainably. So there's always stuff growing back. But it's only the older females who do that. The younger ones are all males. They don't know how to garden. They try to break in. And then, of course, the females will bulldoze them out of the way. I mean, there are so many cool stories.
I think there's something so poetic about the limpets following their own trails home. It's like the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale about the menace of it, you know? I thought that was really nice. Can you tell us a little about the process of reporting the book? Did you have a chance to watch a lot of animals making use of their slime, or how did you go about steeping yourself in this world while also capturing some of the evocative scenes that you include?
That was really hard, because, as I've said, you don't really see the slime. I mean, you can, I did one interview where the guy in the end asked me, but I told him about slimes everywhere. I mean, everyone produces it. And he just sat there and then, do you see it now? Is there some slime? But there only was one potted plant, so not much to see. Then it was snails mainly, of course, and then the hagfish. So the best experience ever, the hagfish, king of slime. So if you don't know what a hagfish is, it looks like an eel, but it isn't the eel, it isn't a fish either. It's like the evolutionary, really, really old creature. With a rather strange face, to put it mildly, that lives on the bottom of the sea and just waits for dead bodies to come down, and then will tunnel through the flesh and rasp it off and eat it. And it doesn't have any defense like claws or teeth or anything, but it slimes. And the slime means there's probably it's a unique slime, and if you look it up on the internet, there's even a video of a shark trying to eat a hagfish, and it tries to bite, and then it can't even close its mouth, and it swims off shaking its head, and there's a cloud in its mouth, and that's the slime, because the hagfish store those slime molecules plus extra strong fibers in their skin, and if they're threatened, they just release those molecules, and they will expand massively and bind like a huge amount of water. And I went to California because they fish hagfish there. And there was this tank with like hundreds of hagfish, and I have to just refresh the water all the time because, of course, they're agitated, and the whole water in this huge tank will turn to slime immediately. And if you put your hands in there, you can lift it out. It's like a textile, which is actually a good thing, because researchers are now trying to use those hagfish fibers or to imitate them to create new kinds of textiles. I think even bulletproof vests and whatnot. But it's fantastic, and you can't get it off. So in the end, I used a towel that was rather stiff already, and you have to rub it off. You just can't get it off. And even the hagfish has a problem to get it off. It will, in the end, it looks like an eel, so it will like make a knot of it, let that knot travel along the length of its body and simply stripe it off in a sense. Yeah. So I think nothing can compete with the hagfish. That definitely was the best experience.
Your comment about hagfish and the potential applications that studying them would have for developing textiles reminds me of something you talk about, which is this, I guess, new or evolving academic discipline called mucomics. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Yeah. Which is the study of animal mucuses to use their designs with an eye toward developing new technologies. So I'd love to hear a little more about what else researchers are trying to learn from animal slimes or plant slimes that could potentially improve human life.
Yeah, there's a lot going on at the moment. I mean, when I was researching the book, I was so happy to find one publication from time to time, and now it's way more than I could even read, let alone write about it. There are so many approaches to biological slimes, and where researchers try to imitate them, that we can use them. It goes from hydrogels. I mean, the technical name for biological slimes is hydrogels, that are a bit like our connective tissue. That's like the matrix where all our cells are in, that give us that three-dimensional form. And this is, of course, where cells and tissues develop. So if you want to grow a tissue in the lab, you need that scaffold where you put your cells in, that they can go whichever way you choose for them. And that's mainly due to whatever kind your matrix have for them. So this is one thing where researchers use our connective tissue is too complex to replicate, but at least something that's a bit like that. Then, of course, like you said, the animal slimes, I think the whole research around glues, novel kinds of glues, that's huge, because the glues we have are not really good. So many of them are either toxic, then they, of course, they don't really bind underwater. We all know that if you have a Band-Aid and you take a shower, that thing will probably fall off. And then you look at all those marine creatures, sea stars, mussels, limpets, snails, worms, they all produce slimes, and they can move on that slime, and they can stick even in the heaviest wave or wherever in the tidal zone. So how do they do it? And often they can even reuse the slime. It dries out, and then just with a bit of water, they can reuse it. That's another thing that we can't do. So I think, there are many groups around the world actually that try to just imitate snail slime or just from other animals. And one cool application for that kind of thing would, of course, be surgery. So it would be so much more elegant if you could just glue a wound shut. And that, of course, would be important as well if there's an accident, let's say, of soldiers who so often die from blood loss. And if you have that kind of sticky hydrogel that you squeeze in there and it just stops the bleeding, that could help so many people. And that's a lot of basic research, so a long way to go to use it. But some examples are there that already work, even in animals where they've tried it, animal models, closed wounds, and then even I think even with the embryos when they were growing and stuff like that, and even then the glue held. There's blood and there's water and it's been stretched the material, and even then that glue held. And of course, just for regular uses, our world is basically glue, and there's so much of the furniture, the hardwood floor, shoes, books. Often we can't recycle them because the glue is the problem. It's toxic. So if we could exchange that, that would be great success.
Oh, that's amazing. So one vision of the future would be all of those glues replaced with something based on an organic model that wouldn't be toxic to recycle later. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
So you made the point a little earlier that slimes are everywhere, and so is climate change, and that could pose a risk, right? If slime changes at this barrier between earth and atmosphere, or between water and atmosphere, we potentially face these added challenges. Is there anything more to say about how slime will change in a world reshaped by climate change? Is there a scenario where slime becomes more powerful in this future world?
Yeah, there is. Like we talked about the slimy skin of the sea, where there could even be more slime. So it's not like, we all know that, of course, the ocean is warming up and it's becoming more acidic. So snails and mussels and all those creatures that have their calcareous skeletons suffer from it because those shells weaken and stuff like that. And I think it's probably not completely linear, but it's the more acidic the sea becomes, the worse the effect is. But it's different with slime. I think very often, especially when it comes to microbes, there will be more slime, but it could be that for some reason it's important that this slime is sticky, and then maybe it's not as sticky as before. Or if you take those marine creatures, snails that move on slime, but they also anchor themselves if there's some danger or they need to stick to the underground. But what happens if the slime only becomes, if it's less sticky, let's say, then maybe they can't withstand the tides and they just die. Or it's more sticky and then it takes too much energy for them to remove themselves from that glue. Mm-hmm. There could be even tiny changes could have huge effects, especially in the sea. I've said that all life forms use slimes, but of course on land, mostly we have that mucus and the slimes inside the body because it would dry out on the outside. So we don't see it. But in the sea, we all know fish are slippery. There's slime everywhere. And we don't even know what the interactions are. So we know that many marine creatures like snails, limpets, sea stars, they have as larvae, they're mobile, moving around and looking for a location to settle. And they just, if they found something that's interesting, they will maybe wait for a bit and then just die if it's not good enough. But what are the signals for them to settle down there. And we think now that at least in many cases, they recognize biological slimes there made by microbes. But is one particularly attractive, or will they not settle there if once there, no one really knows? And tiny changes, and that could be, this could really disrupt the life cycles of so many marine creatures. And then if you look on land, like I said, the soil crusts in the desert, tiny changes, those communities, no one really knows. I mean, there was even a publication, I think last year, where researchers came together to define what a soil crust really is, a biological soil crust in the desert, to say, okay, there's more research going on, but what do we really mean, and what's not a soil crust? So that at that stage, that's really early to say, what is it really? We need a definition. And at the same time, it's all threatened. So I think there could be many changes. Even small ones have those ripple effects. Like you said, could slime become all powerful? Yes, I think so. And that's not my theory. There are researchers who say there could be, at least in some marine habitats, something like an age of slime, because we have probably many species will die out, and then we have overfishing, and then what's left? That's microbes. There will always be microbes, and they will produce their their biofilms. And if these aren't scraped off by snails, because maybe there aren't any snails, there aren't snails anymore, then they will become thicker and more sticky, cover everything. Algae will survive, so you have those thick algae mats, and you will probably have jellyfish. It seems that they're really, really robust, and even might thrive because of climate change. And then, I mean, I love slime, really. It's great stuff, but it's all about the balance. And we shouldn't lose the slime and the slimers, but there shouldn't be too much of it. So to think that you the sea snot, that was a bit like that, it's all just slime, and everything that hasn't died out before or died is suffocated. That's not really a good thing.
Right. And that had huge economic impacts too on fishing and tourism.
Absolutely.
And all of that.
It already has. Yeah.
I think it's a great reminder how ecosystems are fragile, and so are the relationships between communities and ecosystems, right? They're in like a really narrow band of symbiosis, I guess. Yeah. You point out in the note about mucomics growing as this field, that there's a lot of new research, and kind of one wonderful and frustrating thing about writing books is that like this is a finished product, right? As research continues to evolve, unfortunately, you can't like scribble in the margins of your book. And I was just wondering, over the years since you've written it, if there's anything interesting that you wish you could add now.
Yeah, a lot. Even the English edition is a revised version of the German, because so much is happening. And I have to say, there are so many great slime stories coming out like every day now. I mean, you have to know where to look. It's not a slime. They might not call it slime, but the slime is in there. And I tried as a journalist to keep up, just publish one article after the other, but it's too much. So I resigned myself to that in a sense, I was lucky. I mean, I kept that first article about the snail trails for back then, maybe 15 years. And I thought, okay, now is the time. Now I will try to write it. And it seems that I was lucky enough to hit that sweet spot where I could put everything in the book, of course, just broad strokes. But still, I didn't have to leave anything out that I thought was important, like some big slime story. It would be impossible now. But I mean, it's okay. These books, they're always just, it's like a snapshot. And you go from there. But it's true. Yeah. Sometimes I wish, why couldn't I publish that thing like 2 years?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love to hear a little bit about what's next for you research wise. Are you planning a follow-up to slime, or what direction are you heading in now?
I mean, okay. There's still a lot of slime going on in my life. But I think I've extended what I'm interested in a bit now. It's still where our human emotions overlap with biological phenomena, or let's say distort our view of nature, because this is maybe ultimately what fascinated me most about slime, that there's this huge story. It's so important. Probably every single disease has somehow to do with this one slime or the other. But I was the first one to write a book about it. And that wasn't secret knowledge. I mean, it took a long time to gather it, obviously, but other people could have done the same. So why did we see it? And I think, of course, it's because we're so grossed out by it. So I thought, what's there? It's really hard to find blind spots, your own blind spots. But somehow organically, I moved from slime to parasites. So that's another big story for me now, because they might even have a worse image than slime.
Yeah.
It's hard to say who's loathed more. But then again, parasites, they're really at least half, probably way more of all animal species. So being a parasite is more like the norm than the exception, but we're not treating it like that. And again, there's this rich cultural history, which is just fascinating how that the idea of what a parasite is changed through the centuries, really. So parasites, and then again, there's so many of them, and they make ecosystems complex and food webs complex. So we need parasites, like it or not. That keeps me busy. And another thing, because I just spent a year in the tropics in Singapore, is snakes. I love snakes. I absolutely love snakes. But I think that's just the flip side of people having strong emotions when it comes to snakes. And most people hate them or fear them. And I just love them. And again, they're so important, but we just can't see them for what they really are.
That's so interesting. I'm looking forward to hopefully 2 books coming out of those projects. That'll be great. So I think we have time for some audience Q&As. I see there's one in the chat. Are you going to do that? Okay, great.
Yeah. So there's a viewer who's asking, they were intrigued by your description of slime in the book as a semi-permeable membrane. They'd previously heard this term used to describe the outer surface of cells that can accept or reject molecules selectively. So can you talk more about how slime works this way?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a membrane, but it works a similar way. And actually, all our cells have a slimy coat. So you have the cell membrane, and on the outside, there is actually a slime-like outer coat. And if you think of the pandemic, we've all seen the pictures of the virus trying to dock onto a cell, and you have that receptor sticking out. It always looked the cell like a ping pong ball, and with those few receptors sticking out. And that's not what it actually looks like, because the surface is covered in molecules. That receptor is just one of many. And again, there's a lot of water bound. And again, it's like a gel. It's like a slime. And I think we don't even know how those slime, the mucus we have in the body really works, but there are definitely different mechanisms to sort out who you want in there and who has to stay out. So it, on a very simple basis, it works like a filter. So that scaffold, if it's just tiny pores open, then of course only tiny particles will be able to pass through. And probably the greatest example is in our colon, where you might know we have the trillions of microbes living there, the gut microbiota. That means that the mucus there has to, it lets pass nutrients into the body, at the same time keeps pathogens away and accommodates trillions of microbes. Again, we're talking about stiff water. And that works because there are actually 2 layers of slime. One is really dense, and there are antimicrobial substances that covers the tissue so that no microbe is supposed to get through. And then you have another one that's more like a loose net, and that's where the microbiota live. But there are more mechanisms like that germs or cells in the body, they present like a passport, a molecular passport, to show I'm allowed to go through. And somehow slime can read that and will let them through. Of course, germs then will fake that passport and gain entry, or the slime is smart enough and keep them away. Then the slime, our mucus, has like molecular decoys that look like the receptors, the molecules that the germs are looking for to gain entry into cells. But these are just like loose doorknobs, and they're in the mucus. And once the germ grips it and thinks, oh, there's a cell, it's trapped and gets transported away. So there's trickery on both sides, and it has all to do with slime. Different slimes, the microbes then produce their own biofilms in the body. That's a huge problem, and they also keep antibiotics out, but let nutrients in. For example, they all know how to do it.
That's amazing. Slime continues to impress me.
Yeah, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. So Jessica, if you have a few more questions, we have about 5 minutes left.
Great. Yeah, when I'm interviewing someone as a reporter, I always like to ask the same kind of wild card question at the end, which is, I think people who are experts, as you are obviously about slime, sometimes are super enthusiastic about one thing that people who are lay people like myself don't even think to ask about because we just don't have the expertise. So I was wondering if there's any particular question that you've been hoping someone would ask you because you just really want to talk about it that you haven't gotten yet.
The question, I've been asked that before, but there wasn't enough time to answer it. So what I'm fascinated by is how differently people react to slime. And it's not only German booksellers being really squeamish, while British ones being totally robust when it comes to slime. But also, that's a generalization, of course. But in my experience, women are so much more cool with slime than men. Very often.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And usually I can tell when there's a new review, when I read it, if it's written by a woman or by a man. Because with women, very often it's brilliant. At last, someone tells it like it is. And that's so great stuff. And man, I often keep the topic at arm's length. I have huge reviews in British papers, like half a page. And it's just one anecdote from the book after the other, but very sober. And I think that, how do you even manage to write in a non-emotional way about slime? Yeah, but those reviewer managed to do that. And another interesting effect that the book had is that artists are approaching me now, asking to collaborate.
Cool.
Yeah, artists work one way or the other on slime, and it's only women. And of course,
if they use it as a material, or they make art about slime.
Yeah, exactly. Material, and then one was there who showed me then my own limits. I thought it was totally hard when it comes to slime. An Austrian choreographer, and she had a show on slime called Goodtopia, where she had people in the nude engaging with tons of slime on the stage. And I was in Singapore at the time, so I couldn't go there. I only saw clips online, and it was so hard to watch. I was surprised myself because at that time I had thought about slime and written about it, engaged with it for 4 years straight, basically, and still it somehow hit a nerve. And I think it was because the combination of those people naked, so vulnerable, and then those masses of slime not doing anything. There wasn't really any sexual context or anything, just the slime, and it was so hard for me to watch. So yeah, we all have our limits, I guess.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to go Google that as soon as we're done.
Brace yourself.
Yeah. Well, it was a pleasure to do this. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for hosting us.
Yeah, we are about at the end of our time. So Susan and Jessica, thank you for joining us on At Home at Literati tonight. And thank you to our viewers as well. Make sure you buy the book. The link is in the chat on the event listing that brought you here. And of course, you can always come into the store. We have plenty more recommendations for you. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you at the next event. Bye, everyone.